It was a cold February morning, and I could still smell the burnt bread coming from the house of the lady who lived at the end of the street. The sidewalks were wet, the sky gray, and the wind seemed to play with the leaves that danced on the cracked asphalt. I was walking barefoot, trying not to think about the cold that bit my feet, when I saw something glistening under a bench near the corner of Maple Avenue. It was small, but it shone as if it had been placed there on purpose. Approaching slowly, I realized it was a wallet. Brown leather, expensive, and completely out of place in that neighborhood where nobody even had change for the bus. I picked it up, and for a moment I felt my heart race. It was heavy. My first instinct was to look around. Nobody. Not a living soul. Only the distant sound of a garbage truck and the barking of a dog in the distance. I opened the wallet, and what I saw inside completely changed the course of my life. Before continuing, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, because we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, because His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. Inside that wallet there was so much money that my eyes filled with tears. They were large bills, perfectly folded, in neat bundles. It wasn't something anyone in my world would see every day, or in a lifetime. I couldn't count that fast, but it was clear. There was more than $1 million in dollars. And along with the money, a black card, with a name engraved in gold letters, Richard Hall. That name sounded familiar, as if I'd heard it on the news before, but I couldn't remember where. The weight of what I was holding began to choke me. My stomach churned. I thought of my mother, who worked day and night washing clothes to pay the rent. I thought of my siblings, who went to bed hungry more often than I'd like to admit. That wallet could solve everything: bills, debts, even my grandmother's medical treatment. But along with that thought came another, deeper and quieter one, like a voice within my soul. It was her voice, my grandmother's, repeating the same phrase she had taught me since childhood. "Daughter, what is not yours does not belong to you. God tests the hearts of the righteous with small temptations." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I knew I was facing one of those tests. Every second I held that wallet felt like a trial. I felt the cold sweat on my hands, and I could almost hear the sound of God's clock ticking away at the time of my decision. Would anyone, in my place, return it? My legs trembled as I looked at the bills again. They were real, clean, unmarked. Enough money to change not only my life, but that of my entire family. And yet, everything inside me screamed that this money carried something heavier than gold, perhaps someone's destiny. I decided to walk to the bus stop. I needed to think. I put my wallet in my coat and held it tightly against my chest. The wind was blowing strongly, and with each step I felt my heart beat faster. People hurried past, without imagining that inside that coat a poor girl was carrying $1 million. When the bus arrived, I boarded slowly. I had no idea what to do, but I knew I needed to understand who Richard Hall was. Perhaps he was just an ordinary man, but his wallet screamed otherwise. It smelled of power, of wealth, and of something I didn't recognize: privilege. I got off in the city center and went into a small coffee shop where the smell of fresh coffee welcomed me like a hug. I ordered a glass of water and sat in a corner, watching the world spin outside. I borrowed a cell phone from a friendly woman who was serving the tables. I typed "Richard Hall, Texas" into the search engine, and what came up made me gasp. There he was. The face of a serious, imposing man, surrounded by luxury cars and unimaginable sums of money. An American billionaire, owner of companies, foundations, and properties that seemed to belong to another planet. And there, in my pocket, was his wallet, and his fortune. I thought about turning her in to the police, but something told me that wouldn't end well. I'd heard stories of people who returned things and never saw them again, not even the gratitude. Still, my conscience wouldn't leave me in peace. I spent the whole afternoon with that weight on my chest. With each passing hour, the feeling that God was watching me grew stronger, testing my faith, my character, my courage. That night, when I got home, my mother noticed I was different. She asked if something had happened. I wanted to tell her, but the words wouldn't come out. She looked me in the eyes and said something that broke my heart. "Daughter, poverty only shames us if we lose our honesty. For the rest, God will take care of it." I couldn't sleep. The wallet was under the pillow, like a living secret. I closed my eyes and imagined the face of that man, Richard Hall, trying to understand what he must have felt upon realizing he had lost everything. In the morning, as the sun streamed through the cracks in the window, I made my decision. I took my wallet, wiped it with a cloth, and put it in a bag. My heart was racing, but something inside me was at peace. I knew what I needed to do. I left home with a light heart and teary eyes. I walked to the address I had written down the night before, where one of Richard Hall's companies was located. I didn't know if they would let me in, but at least I would try. On the way, I found an open church. I went in for a moment, knelt down, and asked God to guide me, to give me the strength to do what is right, even if no one ever knew. When I came out, I felt the wind on my face, and somehow I understood that He had heard my prayer. Each step toward that building felt like an eternity. The people who passed me couldn't imagine that. Inside that simple bag, I was carrying the biggest decision of my life. And when I arrived at the entrance, I took a deep breath and said the words that would change everything. "I've come to return something that belongs to Mr. Richard Hall." The security guard looked at me suspiciously, and at that moment I realized the story was only just beginning. The waiting room was enormous, cold, and smelled of expensive perfume. I felt small there, sitting in a chair that seemed made for people more important than me. The floor shone so brightly that it reflected my face, and I barely recognized who was there. At the reception desk, a woman in a suit looked at me with that air of someone who thinks you're in the wrong place. She asked what I wanted, and I simply showed her the bag. I said I needed to speak with Mr. Hall. She frowned, glanced at her watch, and replied in a curt tone, "Mr. Hall doesn't speak to anyone without an appointment." I swallowed hard, but I didn't give up. I explained that the matter was urgent and personal. That's when a tall man in a blue suit appeared behind her. He seemed to be one of the security guards. He looked me up and down, then glanced at the bag and asked, "What's in there?" When I replied that it belonged to Mr. Hall, he hesitated for a second. I think he realized I wasn't lying. He told me to wait and disappeared behind a mirrored door. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The minutes felt like hours. I could only hear the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of footsteps coming and going. I thought about getting up and leaving, but my grandmother's voice echoed in my mind again, soft as a song, "He who does the right thing never regrets it." So I stayed. Even trembling, even terrified, I stayed. Finally, the man in the suit returned. He said that Mr. Hall would see me for a few minutes. "He's curious," he added with a half-smile. Curious. That word sounded strange. I didn't know if that was good or bad. I walked down a long hallway, with expensive paintings on the walls and plants that looked better cared for than many people in my neighborhood. When I entered the room, I felt the air grow colder. The man behind the desk was exactly like the photo I'd seen online. Steady eyes, serious expression, gray hair combed back. He looked up from his computer, observed me for a moment, and asked, "Are you the one who found my wallet?" I just shook my head, unable to answer. He reached out, and I placed the bag on the table. The room fell silent. He slowly opened it, took out his wallet, and the sound of the zipper seemed to echo in the air. When he saw the money intact, he raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You didn't take anything?" he asked, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I shook my head. He smiled, but it was a restrained, almost skeptical smile. "You know, girl, it's not every day that someone returns $1,000,000. Especially someone like you." Those words hung in the air. "Like me?" I asked, unsure if he realized how arrogant I sounded. He didn't answer. He just observed me as if trying to decipher a riddle. Inside, I was fighting back tears. The way he looked at me, as if my honesty were an anomaly, hurt more than anything. I wanted to leave, but he asked me to wait. "I need to check something," he said, calling someone. I felt my heart sink. While he was talking on the phone, I stared at the portraits on the walls. Him, his wife, and 2 adult children. All smiling on a yacht, with the blue sea in the background. They seemed happy, untouched, from a world where no one had to choose between food and dignity. When he hung up, he looked at me and asked where I lived. I answered honestly, and he raised his eyebrows. A tough, Dangerous neighborhood, he commented. I nodded. But full of good people, I added, trying to defend what little we had. He smiled again, this time strangely, as if he didn't understand. Silence returned. He rummaged through his wallet, checking every compartment, every corner, every document. It's all here, he murmured. Then he looked up and asked, in a suspicious tone, "Why didn't you keep the money?" I took a deep breath before answering. Because it wasn't mine. Those 3 words came out simply, but they carried everything I believed in. He seemed confused, almost disconcerted. Do you have any idea what you could do with that money? What you're giving up? I nodded. I do. But I also know what I would lose if I kept it, my peace with God. For a moment, he looked at me with something I didn't understand, perhaps respect, perhaps disbelief. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Sit down." I obeyed. And then he began to ask questions. Many. About my family, my school, my dreams. I answered them one by one, still not knowing what he intended. When I told him that my mother worked washing clothes and that I helped by selling sweets on the street, he fell silent. He looked at me as if he saw something he wasn't used to seeing, purity, perhaps. But before I could understand what was happening, he pressed a button on the desk and called someone. "Bring the portfolio report, please." I froze. Report? What did he mean by that? A few minutes later, an elegant woman entered with a briefcase. He opened it, flipped through a few pages, and looked at me with an expression that chilled my blood. "There's something strange here," he said. "According to the records, there was an additional bank card in this wallet. It's not here." My heart raced. I knew I hadn't taken anything. But the way he spoke, with that cold authority, made it seem like I was guilty. "Sir, I swear to God, I didn't see any card." He crossed his arms, fixing his eyes on mine. "Everyone says that, girl." It was like a punch. I choked on my own tears. I wanted to stand up, to scream, but he just shook his head slowly. "Do you understand what it means to be missing an item from a wallet like this?" I could only repeat, "I didn't take anything." The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt tears streaming down my face, but he seemed impassive. Finally, he sighed and said, "Okay, let's check the cameras. If you're telling the truth, it will be proven." I nodded, still trembling. He pressed another button, and one of the security guards entered. "Take her to the monitoring room." Those words weighed heavily on me. I stood slowly, feeling my knees weak. As I walked, I felt his gaze on my back, a gaze that mixed doubt and curiosity. In the hallway, the security guard tried to reassure me. "Don't worry. If you're innocent, the cameras will show it." But his voice didn't calm me. Inside, shame grew. Never in my entire life had anyone doubted my honesty. In the security camera room, the uniformed man began to rewind the footage. I saw myself entering the building, holding the bag, talking to the receptionist. Then, the security guard escorting me to the room. No suspicious moments. No strange gestures. When he finished, he looked at me and smiled. "Everything's fine. You didn't do anything." I felt my legs go weak. He made a quick call, and a few minutes later the billionaire appeared at the door, now with a different expression. "I saw the images," he said. "Sorry." That word, sorry, it was said so quickly it almost went unnoticed. But even so, I smiled. "It's all right, sir. I just wanted to return what was yours." He looked at me for a long time, perhaps trying to understand where that kind of kindness came from. Before leaving, he asked my name. "Emily," I replied. He repeated it, as if recording a precious word. "Emily," and for the first time his tone changed. There was something different there. A kind of silent respect. But what I didn't know, and what would change everything, was that this man wouldn't let things end there. Because that very day, as I was walking home, Richard Hall decided to find out who I really was. That night, the sound of the wind hitting the window seemed different. I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Hall's face, that look between doubt and astonishment, stuck to me like an indelible memory. It was as if something inside me had changed, and it wasn't just fear. It was a feeling that God was leading me to something much greater than I could understand. Lying in bed, I thought about everything that could have happened if I had made a different choice. One wrong step, one wrong decision, and my soul would have been indebted to heaven itself. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief for having done the right thing. Sadness for knowing that the world no longer believed in people who did the right thing. My mother noticed I was acting strangely at breakfast. "Is everything all right, honey?" she asked, stirring her black coffee. I just shook my head, too afraid to tell her what had happened. "God tested me, Mom," was all I could manage to say. She looked at me tenderly and replied, "And you passed, Emily. That's all that matters." I left for work with a light heart, but a restless mind. I walked through the neighborhood streets, observing the simple houses, the smell of soap coming from the balconies, the laughter of children chasing after a punctured ball. Everything seemed the same, but inside, something burned. A feeling that what had begun was not yet finished. On the way, I ran into Pastor Samuel, the same one who always preached on the corner by the hardware store. He greeted me and said, "Emily, God is watching you, daughter. Stay strong. He has plans." I was speechless. How could he know? Or maybe it was just a divine coincidence. As I walked, I remembered Mr. Hall's words, "Do you know what you've lost?" They echoed in my mind all day. Had I lost something? Perhaps in the eyes of the world, yes. But looking at the sky, I felt I had gained something much greater. The peace that comes when you do the right thing, even if no one sees it. In the afternoon, I returned home exhausted. My brothers were playing outside, their hands dirty with soil and smiles that melted away any weariness. I went inside and saw my mother washing clothes, as always. The foam rising from the tub, the sun shining on her face. I thought about how that money could change everything. That's when the temptation came. Not as a voice, but as a silent memory. The image of the bundles of money, the sound of the bills being handled. What if I had kept some? I thought, ashamed. No one would ever know. And, for a second, I felt the real weight of poverty. Poverty is treacherous. It whispers that you deserve relief, that the sacrifice has already been too much, that God would understand. And that's when our hearts are tested. I remembered my grandmother's words, firm as stone, "Temptation speaks beautifully, but its result is always ugly." That night, I knelt beside the bed and wept. I asked God for forgiveness for having doubted, even for a moment. I asked for strength to continue believing that doing good is worthwhile. I also prayed that that man, Mr. Hall, would find in his heart the same faith that I was rediscovering. The next day, something strange happened. A black car stopped at the corner. I didn't pay much attention, but I realized it had been there for too long. The window was tinted, the engine was running. I felt a chill. That kind of car didn't appear there for no reason. I pretended not to understand, but the car was still stopped. When I left the house to go to the market, it started moving slowly, as if it were following me. It accelerated, then slowed down. My heart raced. I looked back once, twice, 3 times. The third time, I saw the driver, or rather, part of him. He was a man in a suit, with sunglasses, the kind you only see on television. And it was at that moment that something inside me screamed, "Richard Hall!" But why would he follow me? I ran to the market, trying to hide my panic. I bought bread and milk, but my hands were shaking so much that I dropped the coins on the counter. The clerk looked at me strangely, but I didn't say anything. When I left, the car was no longer there. Or maybe it was on another street, watching. I went home with my heart racing. At every corner, I felt like someone was watching me. Fear took hold. I told my mother, but she said it was just my imagination. "Maybe you're still nervous, daughter. It's been a lot of excitement these past few days." Maybe she was right. But something inside me told me it wasn't just my imagination. On Sunday, I went to church. I sang, I prayed, I asked for peace. The pastor spoke about trials. He said that when God wants to change our story, He first tests our character. And I knew right there that my test was not yet over. After the service, an unfamiliar woman called me from the gate. She was dressed simply, but had a firm look in her eyes. "Are you Emily?" she asked. I nodded, suspicious. "Mr. Hall asked me to deliver this." She held out an envelope. My heart froze. The envelope was white, with nothing written on it. "What is this?" I asked. She simply replied, "He said you would know." I grabbed the envelope and hurried inside. I sat on the bed and took a deep breath before opening it. Inside was a letter, handwritten in elegant calligraphy. It began like this: "Emily, you reminded me what it means to be human." My hands trembled as I read. He said he couldn't stop thinking about my honesty, that he had lost faith in people a long time ago, until he met me. He also said he wanted to see me again, but this time without formalities. At the end of the letter, there was a phone number and a sentence that left me breathless. "I don't want to reward you, I want to get to know you." I stood there paralyzed for a while, staring at those words. Part of me told me to ignore it. Another part said it was a sign. That maybe God was opening a door, and that I needed to have the courage to walk through it. That night, the dilemma returned with force. I could pretend I never saw the letter and continue with my simple life. Or I could call and find out what was behind all this. I went to the window. The moonlight streamed through the curtain and illuminated the envelope on the table. The letter seemed to glow, as if calling to me. I picked up the phone and dialed the number, but stopped before pressing the last digit. "Sir, what do you want from me?" I whispered. I felt a strange peace, as if someone were silently answering me, "Trust." So I closed my eyes and dialed the last number. On the other end of the line, a deep, calm voice answered, "Emily." It was him. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. Hearing that voice, so different from its cold tone before, left me breathless. "It's me, Mr. Hall." He took a deep breath. "I want to see you. Tomorrow. Just the two of us. Can I come to you?" I hesitated. "Here, in my house?" "Yes." "I need to understand something. You've taught me more than you realize, and I don't want to let that slip away." At that moment, I realized the moral dilemma wasn't just about returning a wallet. It was about what I would do with what God was placing before me. And I didn't know if I was ready for the answer that would come the next day. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. My heart was already racing, as if it knew that this day would be anything but ordinary. I washed my face with cold tap water and looked at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. The girl staring back at me seemed different, someone about to cross an invisible line between the past and something new. My mother noticed I was restless. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked, while making coffee. I thought about lying, but I couldn't. "Mr. Hall is coming over." She almost dropped her mug. "The billionaire," she said, shocked. "Yes, Mom. He wants to talk." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. "Emily, are you sure about this? People who are too rich don't show up in poor neighborhoods for no reason." She was right. Deep down, I didn't know what to expect either. But there was something in that letter that gave me peace, a feeling that God was guiding everything. "I trust you, Mom. And if it's a test, I want to pass it again." The hours passed slowly, dragging on. Every noise in the street made me run to the window. Until, around 11 o'clock, a black car approached. It stopped right in front of our house. My heart raced. The car door opened, and he got out. Dark suit, firm posture, the same determined look. But there was something different about his face. It wasn't arrogance. It was curiosity mixed with humility. He looked around, observing the alley, the simple houses, the clothes hanging on the line. For a moment, he seemed surprised that I actually lived there. He walked to the gate with a restrained smile. "Good morning, Emily." "Good morning, Mr. Hall." I opened the gate, still not believing this was happening. He extended his hand, and I gently shook it, feeling the coldness of his gold rings contrasting with the warmth of my skin. "May I come in?" he asked. I nodded. "Of course, sir. But the house is simple." He smiled. Sometimes, simplicity is where truth resides. We went inside. My mother, nervous, wiped her hands on her apron. "Welcome, sir." He replied politely, but I noticed his gaze sweeping over the room, the antique furniture, the peeling walls, the portrait of my grandmother on the altar in the living room. It was as if every detail made him think. He sat down on the sofa and took off his jacket, resting it on the arm of the armchair. "Emily," he began, in a softer tone, "I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about you. About how someone so young, with so little, managed to resist a temptation that many adults wouldn't resist. I didn't know what to say. I just listened, my hands trembling on my lap. I want to tell you something," he continued. "That wallet. It wasn't just about money. It was proof." "Proof?" I asked, confused. He took a deep breath. "Yes. For the past few months, I've been doing something I call an integrity test. I leave wallets with valuables in different locations to see how people react. You were the first one to return everything." I was breathless. Had all of this been staged? My heart raced. "So, it was a test." He nodded, his gaze serious. "Yes. But you passed with something no one else showed, purity of soul. I needed to see you again to understand why." Inside, I was torn between relief and indignation. Part of me wanted to cry with anger. Another part wanted to thank God for having done the right thing without knowing. "Lord, I didn't know." He smiled. "Exactly. That's what makes it all the more beautiful." Silence hung in the air for a few seconds. My mother watched everything from afar, tears in her eyes. "Mr. Hall," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "God bless you for coming. My daughter has always believed that honesty brings blessings." He looked at her respectfully. "And she's right." Then he looked at me again. "Emily, I want to do something for you. Not as a reward, but as recognition. Would you study if you had the chance?" The question caught me off guard. "Study? Of course I would. I always wanted to." He opened an envelope he took from his pocket. Inside were some papers. "It's a full scholarship to a private school, and a savings account to help with your family's expenses." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Just say thank you to God, Emily. I'm just an instrument." Tears streamed down my face before I could stop them. My mother was crying too. It seemed like a dream. But what impressed me most wasn't the money, it was his gaze. The gaze of someone who had rediscovered something long lost. He stayed with us for over an hour. He talked, asked about my grandmother, about what life was like in the neighborhood, about the church we attended. He listened attentively, without rushing. It was as if, on that day, he had ceased to be a businessman and become a simple human being. Before leaving, he stood up and extended his hand to me again. "You reminded me of something money can't buy, Emily. Peace of mind." I felt a lump in my throat. I only did what was right. He smiled. "That's exactly what impresses me." I walked him to the gate. When he got into the car, he turned and said, "Emily, sometimes God puts us on opposite paths just so we can cross at the right time." And then he drove off, leaving behind the soft sound of the engine and a silence full of meaning. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to process everything. The letter, the visit, the test, the scholarship. It was as if the world had turned upside down in less than 24 hours. But what I didn't know was that this meeting wouldn't be the last. In the following days, I started attending the new school. Everything was different. The people, the atmosphere, even the smell of the classrooms. I felt like a stranger in a world that wasn't mine. Still, something told me I should be there. The teachers were kind, but the students, not so much. I was the girl from the desk story. The rumor had spread. Some looked at me with curiosity, others with disdain. And that started to hurt me more than I imagined. One afternoon, as I was leaving school, I saw a familiar car parked across the street. It was him. Richard Hall. He seemed to be waiting for me. I approached slowly, and he rolled down the window. "Can I offer you a ride?" I got in, feeling a little awkward. The car smelled of leather and mint. He drove in silence, as if thinking carefully before speaking. After a few minutes, he said, "Emily, I see something in you that reminds me of who I was before I lost myself in money." I remained silent. He continued, "When I was young, I also believed that doing the right thing was everything. But the world taught me otherwise. Until you came along. I looked at him, and our eyes met for a moment. It was as if fate were weaving two different stories together with the same invisible thread. Mr. Hall, I only did what my grandmother taught me. He smiled. Then thank her for me. Because thanks to you, I started praying again. Those words sent shivers down my spine. And before I could answer, he added in a soft tone, "But there's something you don't know yet, Emily. Something I need to tell you in person." I turned my face away, surprised. What could it be? He simply looked ahead, his gaze distant, and said, "The truth about the day I lost that wallet." At that moment, I realized that the story I thought had ended was only just beginning. That night, I barely slept. His phrase, "The truth about the day I lost that wallet," it kept echoing in my head like a distant bell. What else could be behind that story? Had he lied? Or was there something even deeper, something I couldn't even imagine? The next day, he called me early. His voice sounded different, more serious, almost distressed. "Emily, I need to see you today." "It's important." I agreed. We arranged to meet at the same cafe where it had all begun, downtown. The same place where I had first looked up his name. It felt like we were going back to the beginning. When I arrived, he was already there. Sitting by the window, his gaze fixed on the street. But something about him was different. He seemed older, more tired. His impeccable suit remained, but the sparkle in his eyes had faded. "Thank you for coming, Emily," he said when he saw me enter. I sat across from him, feeling the weight of the silence between us. "What's going on, Mr. Hall?" He took a deep breath, placed his hands on the table, and began, "That wallet, it really was mine. But I didn't lose it by accident." The air grew heavy. "What do you mean?" I asked. He lowered his voice, almost a whisper. "I dropped it on purpose. But it wasn't to test you. It was to test someone else." My body froze. "Someone else?" He nodded, looking out the window. "I suspected someone close to me was stealing. I wanted to test him, and in the middle of it, you showed up." His words cut through the air like a knife. I was speechless. He continued, "You found the wallet before my security guard did. And that changed everything." I felt a chill down my spine. "So, if I hadn't found it, someone else would have?" He looked at me with a tense expression. "Yes. And that other person would have used it against me." For a moment, I was silent. The cafe around me seemed distant, as if time had stopped. He ran a hand over his face, tired. "What you don't know, Emily, is that, since that day, my life has become a battlefield." "Battlefield?" I repeated, confused. He nodded. "Someone very close to me is trying to destroy me. And you, unintentionally, got caught in the middle of it." My heart began to pound erratically. "What do you mean by that?" He leaned forward. "After you returned the wallet, rumors started circulating. They say I orchestrated everything to appear generous. That I used a poor girl to clean up my image." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. "But that's a lie," I protested. He nodded. "I know. But the world of the rich doesn't live in truth. It lives on appearances. And now, they want to use you to get to me." Tears began to burn my eyes. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know that, Emily. But people don't care about the truth. They care about what seems to be true." He sighed. "And, unfortunately, you're at the center of it." I was speechless. I never imagined that something pure, like an act of honesty, could become ammunition for evil. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because things are getting worse. And because maybe I need your help." My heart skipped a beat. "My help? I'm just a girl." He shook his head. "No, Emily. You're the only person who has nothing to gain from me. And that's exactly why I trust you." For a moment, I felt compassion. That man, powerful and rich, seemed as vulnerable as a lost child. But there was something strange, a glint in his eyes that I couldn't decipher. A mixture of fear and guilt. "Mr. Hall, what do you want me to do?" He hesitated before answering. Just keep being yourself. I just needed to warn you. Things can get ugly. He left money on the table and stood up. But before leaving, he leaned over and said something that chilled me to the bone. If anyone tries to talk to you about me, don't say anything. Please. Emily. It's more serious than you think. I watched as he left the cafe. That man, who had previously seemed invincible, now walked like someone fleeing from shadows. And I felt that, somehow, the shadows were coming after me too. In the following days, everything became strange. People who had never spoken to me before started looking for me. Journalists, reporters, curious onlookers. They wanted to know the truth about the wallet incident. I denied it, tried to avoid it, but it seemed like everyone knew my name. One afternoon, as I was leaving school, a man stopped me on the sidewalk. "You're Emily, right? That girl from the Billionaires." He was holding a microphone and recording with a cell phone. "Is it true that he paid you to return his wallet?" I froze. "No. That's a lie," I yelled, trying to get out of there. He laughed mockingly. "Then why would a poor girl have done that for free? Everyone has a price, darling." Those words pierced me like knives. I ran to the bus stop, trembling, and waited for the first bus that came along, without even looking at its destination. People on the bus stared at me, some whispered. Shame swallowed me whole. When I got home, my mother was terrified. "Emily, what's going on?" "People are taking pictures of the house." I looked out the window. There were 2 cars parked across the street, cameras pointed at them. "They say they want an exclusive interview." I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. Everything I had done with a pure heart was being turned into a spectacle. "Mom, I only did what was right." She hugged me tightly. "I know, daughter. But the world doesn't always understand what's right." That night, the phone rang. It was him. His voice was tense and hurried. "Emily, I need you to leave town for a few days." I froze. "What?" He insisted. "It's not safe. They're trying to get to me through you." My whole body trembled. "But where would I go?" He hesitated, then replied, "I have a house in the countryside. Isolated. I can take you there until things calm down." For a moment, fear took over. "What if it's dangerous?" He replied, "Trust me, Emily. I promise it's only for a short time." I hung up the phone and stood there, staring into space. The rain beat hard against the window, the wind howled outside. My mother watched me, worried. "Daughter, what did he say?" I looked at her, not knowing what to do. My head was spinning. Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part whispered that something was wrong, very wrong. I went to my room and knelt before my grandmother's portrait. "Grandma, if you can still hear me, please help me. I don't know if I'm being guided by God or deceived by fear." I stood there for a long time, in silence, until a memory came, the words of Pastor Samuel, "Even the enemy knows how to disguise himself as light, Emily." My heart froze. Suddenly, I realized that maybe I didn't know that man as well as I thought. Maybe the truth about the day he lost his wallet was very different from what he told me. I stood up slowly, my mind filled with a strange certainty. I needed to find out what he was hiding. And it was precisely with that decision that I began to walk, without knowing that I was about to enter the most dangerous part of my own story. That night was one of the longest of my life. I lay motionless, listening to the distant sound of cars and trying to understand what I had gotten myself into. His name, Richard Hall, echoed in my mind like an incomplete song. Something didn't add up. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt there was something dark behind the whole story. The next morning, I woke up determined. I needed to know the truth. I grabbed an old notebook and started writing down everything I remembered from the day I found the wallet. Every phrase, every gesture, every contradiction. And the more I wrote, the more I realized that some things simply didn't make sense. For example, he said the wallet was part of a test, but later claimed another person was involved. Which version was true? And why did he, such a powerful man, seem afraid of something or someone? I decided to start searching on my own. I went to the downtown public library and used one of the old computers. I searched for Richard Hall investigation, scandal, fraud, integrity tests. The first few pages were clean, full of flattering reports. But then, I found something different. An article published by an independent journalist, dated 2 months prior. The title gave me chills, The Dirty Truth Behind the Hall Empire. The text discussed a charitable fund he had created, the same one that appeared in his interviews, where he claimed to help underprivileged children. But the article asserted that this fund was merely a front, and that millions of dollars had mysteriously disappeared. My stomach churned. I kept reading. The author claimed to have proof, but that the files had disappeared. And at the end, one sentence shocked me. The last person seen with documents related to the case was a personal assistant, who disappeared shortly after Mr. Hall's wallet went missing. Wallet. The word leaped from the screen like an arrow. I felt my body go cold. Could that wallet be connected to all of this? I left the library trembling, my hands sweating. The cold wind whipped against my face, but I barely felt it. I needed to talk to him. I needed to hear from him what was happening. But at the same time, something inside me told me that maybe he didn't want me to know. I got home, and my mother was worried. "Emily," he called. "He said he's coming by later to pick you up." My heart raced. It was as if God was giving me a chance to look him in the eyes and discover the truth. I waited in the room, praying silently. Lord, if he is lying, show me. If he is innocent, give me peace. But above all, give me courage. When the black car pulled up to the door, I felt my legs tremble. He got out quickly, without his usual smile. "We need to talk, Emily." "But not here." We got into the car. The silence was heavy. The engine purred, and the streets passed by the window like shadows. Finally, he broke the silence. "Has anyone been looking for you?" "Yes," I replied hesitantly. "Journalists. And a strange man at school." He bit his lip, tense. "They're using you, Emily. They're trying to destroy me." "But why?" I asked, looking directly at him. That's when he looked away. And in that gesture, I understood. There was guilt there. "Mr. Hall, tell me the truth. Is the charity fund real?" He didn't answer. He just kept driving, his jaw clenched. "Mr. Hall," I insisted, my voice trembling. Suddenly, he pulled the car over to the side of the road. The sound of tires on the asphalt echoed like a scream. "Emily, I never wanted to involve you in this. But now it's too late." "Involved in what?" I shouted. He looked at me, his eyes welling up with tears. "That money in the wallet. It wasn't mine." The world stopped. The air disappeared. "What do you mean it wasn't yours?" He took a deep breath, looking at the horizon. "It was foundation money. Money meant for children. And someone embezzled it before I realized it. By the time I noticed, the blame was already on me. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. And what does this have to do with me?" He closed his eyes. "You showed up before they recovered the wallet. And now they think you're part of it." I felt the tears burning. So all this help, the scholarship, the visits, what was it all? A way to silence me. He turned, despair in his eyes. "No, Emily. I wanted to protect you." But his words sounded empty. Protect from what? From what you did? Or from what they are about to discover? He didn't answer. He just placed his hands on the steering wheel, trembling. The car was silent for long seconds. Only the distant sound of the wind and my heartbeat could be heard. Finally, he said, "I made a mistake, Emily. But not in the way they're saying. The money disappeared before I could act. And now, everyone thinks it was me. And why me? Why get involved?" He looked at me with a look I'll never forget. "Because when you returned that wallet, I saw something in you that I hadn't seen in years. Purity. And I thought that, by being close to you, God might forgive me." I felt the tears streaming down my face uncontrollably. He was crying too, but I didn't know if it was regret or fear. The sun was beginning to set, tinging the sky with gold. "Emily," he said, his voice breaking, "you need to believe me. If they knew what really happened, no one would get out alive. "Who are they?" I asked. He glanced nervously in the rear-view mirror. "Powerful people. People who don't forgive." I looked out the window. A black car was right behind me, keeping its distance. "That car. Do you recognize it?" He glanced at it and paled. "They found us." My blood ran cold. "What are we going to do?" He sped off, checking the rear-view mirror every second. "Hold on tight, Emily. Don't look back." The engine roared, the wind cut my face, and I could only think of one thing: the world I thought I knew was crumbling. Suddenly, I heard a loud crack, like a gunshot. The car lost control for a second, and he yelled, "Get your head down!" My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to explode. And in the midst of the chaos, I could only do one thing: close my eyes and pray. "Lord, if this is the end, may it be according to your will. But if there is still anything I need to know, show me." And at that moment, something happened, something I could never explain. The car skidded, spun on the wet asphalt, and everything went dark. For a few seconds, there was no sound, no pain, no time. Just a profound silence, where a soft voice echoed within me, "Emily, the truth is not over yet." When I opened my eyes, everything was white. For a moment, I thought I was in heaven. The smell of alcohol, the distant sound of monitors and hurried footsteps made me understand. It was a hospital. I tried to move, but a weight held me down. There were bandages on my arms and a thin tube connected to my hand. My head throbbed. Everything seemed jumbled: the voices, the memories, the accident. Gradually, flashes began to return, the car spinning, the sound of the impact, his scream, "Emily, lower your head!" And then, silence. I felt my heart clench. "Richard," I murmured, my voice hoarse. A nurse came running in. "You're awake." "Thank God." She smiled, but there was something tense in her eyes. Where is he?" I asked, my voice trembling. She hesitated for a second, looking away. "Mr. Hall, he's in the ICU. In critical condition." I felt the world spin. Tears came before I could even hold them back. "Is he alive?" I asked, almost in a whisper. "He is. But he needs a lot of prayer." She gave me a light tap on the shoulder. "You were lucky, girl. If it weren't for him, you might not be here." Her words hung in the air. "What do you mean?" She explained that, according to the paramedics, Richard had intentionally turned the car onto his side, protecting mine. The impact hit the driver's side with full force. He had saved me. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of it all. That man, whom I barely knew, had risked his own life for me. Suddenly, all doubts, all judgments, seemed to lose their power in the face of such a human, yet divine, gesture. The following days were long. I couldn't get out of bed, but I asked for news of him every day. Every morning, I hoped to hear that he had woken up. And every afternoon, the same silence. "Not yet," the doctors said. While I waited, I began to pray. I prayed fervently, with faith, with tears. "Lord, if he erred, forgive him. If he lied, redeem him. But please, don't take him now. He still has something to fulfill." In the next room, I would sometimes hear machines beeping. At those times, fear would take over. It was as if life hung by an invisible thread, held only by God's mercy. One morning, an elderly lady came into my room. She wore a blue scarf and a gold crucifix around her neck. "Are you Emily?" she asked, smiling sweetly. I nodded. "I'm Mrs. Grace. I've worked with Mr. Hall for 30 years. Her name sounded familiar. "He talked about you a lot, girl. He said he owed you more than money." I felt a lump in my throat. "How is he?" I asked. She sighed. "Still sleeping. But I believe God doesn't end a story without purpose." She approached the bed and handed me a small folder. "He asked me to give you this if something happened." I looked at her, confused. "But he couldn't know. He knew something was coming," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a letter and a small photo, An old, faded photo of a little girl with brown hair playing in a garden. On the back, a handwritten phrase, "Never stop searching for the light, my Emily." My heart stopped. "What?" I murmured. I looked at the photo again. It was me. Me, 5 or 6 years old, in my grandmother's backyard. The same clothes, the same blue ribbon in my hair. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. How did he have that photo? Mrs. Grace wiped away her tears. He never told me. He only said that he had kept that photo for many years. That it was a reminder of what he had lost and what he still needed to find. I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. This doesn't make sense. I didn't even know him. The woman just shook her head. Sometimes, God intertwines lives before we even realize it. I spent the rest of the day looking at that photo, searching for answers in every detail. How could it have ended up in his hands? Did he know me since I was a child? Did my grandmother have any connection to him? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the constant beeping of the hospital machines. With each sound, I remembered that he was fighting for his life. And along with that, doubt grew inside me. Who was Richard Hall, really? The next morning, when the nurse came in, she brought different news. "He moved his hand, Emily. Maybe he'll wake up soon." I felt a glimmer of hope within me. I held the crucifix that was on the nightstand and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. But when he wakes up, I need to understand." The days became a countdown. Until, on a quiet afternoon, I heard the nurse running down the hall. "He's awake," she shouted. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I ran, still weak, to his room. His body was covered in wires, his face pale, but his eyes were open. When he saw me, a faint smile formed. "Emily!" Tears streamed down my face before I could say anything. "Why did you have this picture?" I asked, showing him the portrait. He stared at it for a few seconds, and then, crying, he whispered, "Because you are the daughter I lost." I felt the world stop. "What?" I murmured, my voice faltering. He breathed heavily. "I was a friend of your grandmother's. I loved your mother. But I left her before I knew she was pregnant. When I tried to come back, she was already gone. I've been searching for you for years." Tears blinded me. This can't be true. He weakly held my hand. "I knew God would bring me to you one day. I just never imagined it would be like this." I stood there, motionless, my heart torn between anger and compassion. "You let me grow up in poverty, without a father," he wept. "I was wrong, Emily. I ran away from what was right. And God brought me back to set things right." The whole room seemed to spin. Part of me wanted to run away, another part wanted to hug him. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked. He smiled, his eyes welling up with tears. "Because I didn't think I deserved it." Mrs. Grace, standing at the door, wept silently. "He searched for you for 20 years, girl. He never gave up." I sat beside the bed, feeling the weight of everything that was falling on me. My father. The man I thought was a stranger was my father. He squeezed my hand one last time. "I only ask that you forgive me, Emily. The money, the mistakes, the lies, none of that matters anymore. Only you." "I don't know if I can," I whispered. He closed his eyes. "Then pray for me. Even if you don't forgive me yet. Pray." And that's what I did. I closed my eyes and prayed. I asked God to give me the wisdom to understand what forgiveness truly means. When I opened my eyes again, he was sleeping peacefully. But the monitor beside him began to emit a different, high-pitched sound. "Doctor!" the nurse shouted. The team rushed over. I was shoved out of the room, my heart pounding. "Mr. Hall! Father!" I yelled. No one answered. The doors slammed shut in front of me, and the sound from the monitor became a scream in the void. And at that moment, I understood that his gesture, saving my life, had not been merely human. It had been the price of his own remorse. But what I didn't know yet was that his story and mine were about to intersect again, in a way that would change everything forever. The ICU doors slammed shut in front of me with a sound that echoed in my heart. Those seconds felt like hours. Nurses rushed around, voices mingled, and all I could do was pray. Lord, don't take him now. He just came back to me. But deep down, something told me that plea might come too late. After a few minutes, or perhaps an eternity, the hallway fell silent. A nurse emerged, her eyes brimming with tears. One look from her was enough for me to understand. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. My father, the man I had just met, was gone. The scream stuck in my throat. I wanted to run, hit something, wake up from that nightmare. But all I could do was kneel in the hallway and cry. I cried for him, for my mother, for the girl who grew up without knowing where she came from. And, in the midst of the pain, a strange peace enveloped me. It was as if a soft voice was saying, "It's not over." In the following days, I lived in silence. The house seemed too empty. My mother also cried, but there was understanding in her eyes. God knows what He's doing, daughter. He brought your father to you so that you could forgive each other, even if it was at the last second. I went to the funeral with a heavy heart. The sky was gray, and the cold wind made the flowers sway on the coffin. The pastor spoke of redemption, of forgiveness, of the love of a father trying to mend what time has broken. I looked at that name engraved on the tombstone and thought, can he see me now? Mrs. Grace stayed by my side the whole time. Before we left, she held my hand and said, "He left something for you, Emily. He asked me to give it to him when everything is peaceful." I just nodded, weak. A few days later, she summoned me to Hall Manor, a place that seemed even quieter than before. The curtains were drawn, the sound of footsteps echoing off the cold marble. "He wrote a final letter," she said, handing me an envelope sealed with red wax. My hands were trembling. I carefully opened the envelope. The handwriting was his, shaky but steady. "Emily, if you are reading this, it's because my journey has come to an end. But yours is just beginning. Everything I have belongs to you, not as an inheritance, but as a new beginning. Use it to do the good that I couldn't do." Tears streamed down her face. My God! On my desk, there's a key. It unlocks something I left for you to understand who I was, and who you are. I ran to the office. The key was there, exactly where he had described it. Tiny, golden, with the initials RH engraved on it. For a moment, I felt his spirit was there, watching. With Mrs. Grace's help, I found a safe built behind a painting. The key fit perfectly. When I opened it, I expected to find money, maybe documents. But what was inside? It was something I never imagined. Inside the safe was an old wooden box, wrapped in a blue scarf. I opened it slowly. Inside were notebooks, diaries, all handwritten, with dates going back 20 years. I started reading. The first few pages talked about business, travel, meetings. But soon the writing changed. It became more confessional, more human. He spoke of the guilt of having abandoned the love of his life, my mother. And then, he spoke of me. I look for my daughter in every face I see. Sometimes I think I recognize her in a girl smiling on the street, or in a young woman helping her mother at the market. And every night, I ask God to give me one more day to find her. My chest tightened. Each word was both a stab and a hug at the same time. I kept reading until I reached the last diary entry, written a few weeks before the accident. "If I die before I find her, let her know. The wallet was my last attempt to be tested by God." And He answered me, through it. I closed the diary, crying. Everything I needed to understand was there. He wasn't a perfect man, but he had become a repentant man. And sometimes, that's what matters most to God. I decided to fulfill His request. I used some of the resources He left to create a small shelter in my neighborhood. A place for homeless children, with the name He always repeated, the House of Light. Months passed. The news spread. The billionaire's daughter who returned $1 million creates a shelter for underprivileged children. For the first time, I felt that something good was being born from the pain. People came to help, to donate, to pray. And, deep down, I knew He was proud. But one day, something happened that made my heart race again. I received a letter with no return address. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting, it was identical to his. I opened it with trembling hands. There was only one sentence. "Emily, you thought it was the end, but there's still something you need to see." Inside the envelope was a small, recent photograph of a man who looked very much like Richard Hall, sitting on a park bench, wearing a hat and holding a book. My body froze. The face was the same. The scar on the eyebrow, the same look. I showed it to Mrs. Grace, who turned pale. "This can't be. I saw the body myself." But there it was. Alive or not, the fact is that something, or someone, was calling me to find out what really happened. I picked up the crucifix from the table, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Lord, if this is yet another test, give me courage. I will no longer run from what you want to show me." And that's when I realized that his unexpected return wasn't just a memory, it was a calling. A call to uncover the truth that was still hidden, and which could change not only my life, but the destiny of everyone who crossed that man's path. And with the letter in hand, I set off, not knowing if I was going to meet a miracle or a new deception. The road seemed endless. I drove alone, my heart pounding, the letter on the passenger seat. Each curve, each kilometer, brought a mixture of fear and hope. Could he really be alive? Or was all this a divine sign, a final lesson in faith? The address on the letter led to a small town in the countryside called Willow Creek. A peaceful place, full of old trees and dirt roads. As soon as I arrived, the air smelled of pine and fresh rain. Everything seemed familiar, as if I had been there before, perhaps in a dream. I parked the car in front of a small square. On the wooden bench, exactly as in the photo, sat a man. Brown hat, book in his hands. My heart began to race. I walked slowly, afraid to believe it. "Mr. Hall?" I murmured, my voice almost fading away. He lifted his face. His eyes were the same, but there was something different about them, a serenity I had never seen before. He smiled, and in that instant, I knew, it was him. Alive. I ran to him, tears streaming down my face. "My God, it's you." He stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. "Calm down, daughter. I'm here." I hugged him tightly. I smelled the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with the smell of wet earth. It was real. But how? I saw the funeral. Mrs. Grace. She saw the body. He sighed. It was necessary. Sometimes, to start over, you have to die to the world. I was speechless. He sat down again, looking at me sweetly. I couldn't continue being Richard Hall. The name was tarnished, the empire was corrupt. So I left it all, and started over. But what about me? Why didn't you tell me? I asked, tears streaming down my face. Because you needed to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I gave you the money, but that wasn't the real gift. I sat down next to him, confused. What do you mean? He opened the book he was holding. It was an old Bible, with worn pages. Inside, there was a bookmark with a handwritten note, Matthew 6:21, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." He smiled. "The real gift, Emily, is knowing where your heart is." Tears blinded me. "But you disappeared. You left me thinking you were dead." He nodded. "Because I needed you to discover who you were without the weight of my name. And you succeeded." I looked at the floor, trying to contain my emotion. "The house of light," he smiled. "Yes. You transformed pain into purpose. And that's the kind of wealth no one can steal." For a few minutes, we stood in silence, listening only to the sound of birds and the wind rustling the leaves. "God showed me something, Emily," he said calmly. "That sometimes the greatest miracle is not being saved, but being used to save others." I stared at him, trying to understand everything that had happened. "So, everything I've been through, all the trials, the losses," he interrupted, "they were lessons. Every fall, every tear, every prayer. You were chosen to light the way for those who are still lost." I felt a shiver run through my body. "But, sir, what will you do now?" He looked up at the sky and replied, "Continue what I started. But now, without fame, without riches. Only with faith." I pulled the old photo out of my pocket, one of me as a child. "That photo, why did you keep it?" He smiled. "Because it reminded me that, even without knowing it, I already had reason to redeem myself." The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. It was as if God himself were blessing that reunion. "Emily," he said, "the money I left was just a seed. But now, there's something greater I want to give you." He opened the leather briefcase beside him and took out a plain envelope. Inside was just a piece of paper, with an address and a name on it, Grace Home Ministries. "This is a shelter I founded many years ago, but it almost closed. I want you to take it over, to transform it into a real home." I remained silent, not knowing what to say. He placed his hand on mine. "You were born to care, daughter. It's the gift God gave you, and no amount of money can buy that." Tears streamed down her face again. "I don't know if I can." He smiled. "You can, because the faith that lives within you is greater than any fear." The church bell in the distance rang 6 times. He looked in the direction of the sound, as if time had stopped. "It's time," he murmured. "Time for what?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "Time to give you the last gift." From the inside pocket of his coat, he pulled out a small gold medallion. On it was the same symbol of the cross that my grandmother wore. "It belonged to your mother," he said, his voice trembling. "She asked me to give it to you when the time was right." I took the medallion in my hands, and my heart raced. Inside was a photo, my young mother, smiling, and him, side by side, radiant. On the back, an engraved phrase, "One day, the light will unite us again." I couldn't hold back the tears. "Dad." He hugged me tightly. "The light has already united us, daughter. Now you need to carry it forward." We stayed like that for a while, in silence, until I noticed he was trembling slightly. "Are you all right?" He smiled, but his eyes were watering. "My body isn't as strong anymore, Emily, but my spirit is at peace." I felt a pang. "Don't talk like that." He squeezed my hand. "Promise you won't let the light go out?" "I promise." He looked at the horizon and murmured, "Then I can rest." My heart froze. "Dad, no. Don't say that." He smiled one last time, his gaze serene, and whispered, "You are the inheritance God gave me." And before I could say anything else, he closed his eyes. The wind blew strongly at that moment, and the leaves began to fall from the trees as if the entire sky were crying with us. I hugged his body and screamed. But even through the tears, something inside me told me that he hadn't gone away. He had only returned to the light from whence he came. And it was then, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, that I heard the church bell ring again, but this time a different sound, as if announcing that the story was not yet over. In the days that followed, the world seemed to have stopped. The park bench was still there, empty, as if guarding his presence. I returned every day, sat in the same place, holding the medallion he had given me. The wind shook the trees, and with each gust, it seemed as if God himself whispered, "Don't cry, daughter. He has simply returned home." For a long time, I lived in anger at fate. Why did God wait so long to give me back a father, only to take him away again? But as the weeks went by, I began to understand. Sometimes, the miracle isn't having someone forever, it's having enough time to forgive. The house of light grew. The children ran through the corridors with laughter that seemed to echo to the sky. Some came with harsh stories, as harsh as mine. Others, with frightened eyes that didn't know what love was. And, in each of them, I saw a reflection of myself. I began to teach what I had learned from life. Honesty isn't about what you do when people are watching you, but about what you do when no one is watching. The children listened, curious, and sometimes asked about him. "The man with the wallet," they would say. I smiled. "Yes. The man God sent to teach me what faith is." In the room where I kept the memories, I kept his diary, the Bible, the medallion, and the old photograph. It was my private sanctuary. Sometimes I would go in there, kneel, and simply give thanks. Because, in the end, everything that happened, the fear, the love, the losses, was all part of the same plan. One afternoon, while organizing the donations, I found a child sitting alone in a corner. A thin little boy, with a sad look, holding an old wallet in his hands. I approached slowly. "Where did you find this?" He replied, "In the street." I thought about keeping it, but something told me to return it. My heart raced. I knelt beside him and held his wallet. It was empty, but the gesture struck me like a sign. I smiled and said, "You did the right thing, son. And know that God saw." At that moment, I realized history was repeating itself. But now I was the one teaching. That boy was the version of myself I had been years before. And, just as Richard had done with me, I needed to plant the seed of faith in him. The days became a routine of peace and service. At night, I would read Psalm 23 aloud before bed, and the children would repeat it with me. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." It was as if each word filled the void left by the pain. One day, a woman arrived at the shelter. She had gray hair and eyes full of tenderness. "Are you Emily?" she asked. "Yes." She smiled. "I'm Richard's sister." My body froze. "He told me about you," she said, holding my hands, "and asked me to give you this." It was a small wooden box, just like the ones the diaries were in. I opened it carefully. Inside, there was only a sheet of paper and a cross pendant. On paper, the words he wrote, "If one day you doubt the purpose, look at the cross. It is there that all pain ends and all hope begins." The tears fell silently. I held the pendant to my chest, feeling the gentle weight of faith. "He still speaks to me," I murmured. She smiled. "The righteous never die, Emily. They just change address." That night, it rained heavily. The power went out, and the children gathered in the living room, frightened. I grabbed a flashlight and began to tell the story, my story. I spoke of the day I found a wallet, and how a simple gesture can change destiny. The children listened in silence, their eyes shining in the soft light of the flashlight. And when I finished, a little girl asked, "And did he come back, Aunt Emily?" She smiled, wiping away her tears. "In a way, yes. He came back inside me." After everyone was asleep, I went out onto the balcony. The rain had stopped, and the sky was clear. The clouds parted, revealing a star brighter than all the others. I hugged the medallion and whispered, "Father, thank you. I understand now. The gift you left wasn't money, or the house, or your name. It was faith." I closed my eyes and let the wind touch my face. I felt as if invisible arms were enveloping me, as if God's own love was there, reminding me that nothing is by chance. The next day, I found a letter left under the door. The envelope had no return address, only a handwritten sentence, "The light never dies, Emily. It just changes form." I smiled, my heart at peace. I took the letter to the altar in the shelter and placed it next to his Bible. Everything was in its place. That same day, a reporter showed up. "We want to tell your story to the whole country," he said. I smiled. "This story isn't mine. It's God's." Time passed, and the House of Light became a well-known refuge throughout the region. But, inside me, something continued to grow, a certainty. True love never ends, it transforms. One night, I had a dream. I was walking through a golden field, and in the distance, I saw my father smiling. He extended his hand and said, "You have done it, daughter. Now go in peace." I woke up with tears in my eyes and a feeling I will never forget, that of a mission accomplished. Years passed. Wrinkles appeared, hair changed color, but faith remained strong. Each child who entered that shelter was another chance to repay the grace I had received. Today, when I look back, I see that God wrote my life with lines I would never have dared to draw. Every curve was necessary. Every pain had meaning. And when someone asks me how it all started, I always smile and answer, with a wallet that fell on the street, and a God who never lets anything fall by accident. But sometimes, when the wind blows in the afternoon and the church bell rings in the distance, I still feel it. It's as if a gentle presence passes by my side, and a sweet voice says, "The light remains, Emily." And in that instant I know he is there, not in body but in spirit. Because some stories don't end. They just change eternity. And that's how I discovered that the true miracle of life isn't finding what's lost. It's never ceasing to search for what is sacred. And on that quiet afternoon, As the sun bid farewell behind the hills, the light streamed through the window and illuminated the medallion on my chest. And I understood, His promise and God's promise were still being fulfilled. And perhaps they still are. You know, sometimes life seems like a labyrinth full of wrong doors. But what I've learned is that God never puts us in front of something without purpose. Sometimes, the most painful path is precisely the one that leads us to our own redemption. Today, when I think about everything I've been through, the poverty, the temptation, the fear, the forgiveness, I realize that every detail was part of the perfect plan that God had already written for me even before I was born. There are no coincidences. There is purpose. And that purpose often reveals itself in simple things, like a wallet lost on the sidewalk, a gesture of kindness, or a prayer offered in the midst of pain. What touches me most is knowing that God used something seemingly ordinary to change not only my life, but the lives of many others. And if He did it for me, why wouldn't He do it for you too? Perhaps today you are facing a trial. Perhaps you have lost someone, a job, a hope. But remember, the God who transformed my despair into light is the same God who is ready to transform your story. And that's where I ask you, have you ever experienced something that seemed like an end, but then realized it was a new beginning in disguise? Have you ever felt God test you, not to punish you, but to strengthen you? If so, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story because I believe that when we share what God has done, He continues to act, through our voice, our faith, and our testimony. And if this story touched you in any way, if something within you was awakened, I kindly ask you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. It's not just a gesture, it's a way to continue spreading messages of faith and hope that transform lives. May God bless you with the same love that rescued me. May it give you strength on difficult days, light on dark days, and faith on silent days. And always remember, the miracle isn't in what we find, but in who finds us when we least expect it.